Disease Introduction. Early surgical management of valvular heart disease concentrated on valvular repair. The heroic early procedures for valve stenosis were closed and therefore blind commissurotomies. They were replaced by open procedures with full visualization, allowing precise repair and replacement. The first prosthetic valve replacement was performed by Haken in 1960, replacing the aortic valve, followed by a mitral valve replacement by Starr a year later. Continued improvements in the perioperative care, myocardial protection, and in particular, the development of prosthetic heart valves have improved long-term hemodynamic results, provided symptom relief, and prolonged survival. The majority of valvular operations involve surgery on the aortic or mitral valve. Tricuspid and pulmonary valve surgery is rarely undertaken in isolation. We'll look at the table 54.1, comparing operations for heart valve surgery. The advantages and disadvantages. For valve repair, the advantages are preservation of integral structures, improved hemodynamics, avoid long-term anticoagulation. Disadvantages for valve repair, technical difficulties, variable failure rate. Valve replacement, mechanical valve replacement. Advantages, readily available, extensive experience of use, used in any age group, durability and lifelong. The disadvantage for mechanical valve replacement, needs lifelong anticoagulation and susceptibility to infection. And biological valve replacement, if it's stented, readily available, short period of anticoagulation and limited lifespan. And stentless, readily available is the advantage, probably better hemodynamics with less outflow tract obstruction and short period of anticoagulation. Disadvantage is limited lifespan and more difficult to insert. Homograft, advantages, no anticoagulation, improved hemodynamics, long-term outcome uncertain. Disadvantage, not readily available and technical difficulties. What is the surgical anatomy? Heart valves function to maintain pressure gradients between cardiac chambers and to ensure unidirectional flow of blood without reflux through the heart. The aortic valve is tricuspid with semilunar leaflets and attached to the aortic wall at the annulus, with the aortic sinuses being above the base of each leaflet, two of which form the origin of or ostium of the coronaries. The intrinsic shape of the aortic semilunar valve allows blood to leave the ventricle during systole and prevents regurgitation during diastole. If the disease leads to disruption of the leaflets or the annulus, valve function will be affected. Now we'll see in figure 54.9 the four valves. The aortic valve is centralized, from which we can see the two coronaries coming out from the two ostium of the aortic sinuses. Behind that we can see the mitral valve, and on the left and on the right tricuspid valve, and anteriormost is the pulmonary valve. Mitral valve is bicuspid. The more anterior cusp is larger in area and lies between the orifices of the mitral and the aortic valves. The leaflets, like those of the aortic valve, are attached to an annulus. The leaflets join at two commissures and are supported by a subvalvular apparatus consisting of chordae tendineae and papillary muscles. The papillary muscles contract in ventricular systole, pulling the cusps towards the atrioventricular orifice and holding blood within the ventricle. The proper functioning of the mitral valve depends on the integrity of the annulus, leaflets, chordae and papillary muscles. If surgical correction is required, emphasis is on the preservation of these structures when possible. Surgical options for heart valve disease. The decision of whether to repair or replace the diseased valve depends on the underlying pathology, the severity of disease, and quality and or involvement of the surrounding supporting structures. Generally, repair is increasingly favored when possible in mitral valve disease, particularly in degenerative mitral regurgitation, in which it has shown to have good long-term outcomes. Repair is the operation of choice in tricuspid valve disease, but aortic valve surgery generally involves replacing the diseased valve. Important factors on selecting the type of procedure and prosthesis include the patient's choice, age, existing comorbidities, and the need for anticoagulation. Because of uncertainties about its lifespan, there is debate about when a biprosthetic valve should be used, with most accepting its use in those over 60 years. The need for anticoagulation may have an impact on choice of valve, particularly in women of childbearing age, the elderly, the presence of congenital or acquired bleeding diathesis, and when there is the need for further major surgery. Types of prosthetic valves. Mechanical valves. Mechanical valves can be used in any group to replace any valve. They are extremely durable, but the component of the valve are thrombogenic and therefore the patient requires systemic anticoagulation, usually with warfarin. This subjects the patient to a lifetime of blood tests, medications, and the constant threat of hemorrhagic or thrombotic complications. Hemorrhagic complications like intracerebral epistaxis, gastrointestinal bleed, and thrombotic like cerebral infarction. This is the mechanical bileaflet in figure 54.10. Now coming to biological valves. Biological valves include homograft or allograft valves removed from cadavers, autografts, a patient's own valve, and most commonly heterografts or xenografts prepared from animal tissues. All share the basic design of three semilunar leaflets with central flow, so decreasing pressure gradients and minimizing turbulence. Heterograft tissue valves are the most commonly used valves and can be stented with limited durability for 10 to 15 years, whereas stentless or frameless valves are expected to have less late calcific degeneration but are more technically difficult to insert. This is the porcine heterograft stented valve in figure 54.11. It's a tricuspid or three-cusp valve. Prosthetic valve dysfunction and complication. Structural valve failure. Bioprosthetic valves are vulnerable to degenerative changes. Structural failure rates for biological valves, although rare in those over 70 years of age, can reach 60% after 15 years. However, newer biological valves have a reoperative rate of less than 10% at 20 years. Structural failure of a mechanical valve is generally uncommon. Paravalvular leak. Early onset paravalvular leaks usually result from technical difficulties at insertion. Late onset leaks can occur and may be related to an episode of endocarditis or in the presence of bioprosthesis, leaflet degeneration. The leak can cause hemolytic anemia or hemodynamic compromise and valve may need replacement. Thrombosis and thromboembolism. Thrombus formation on a prosthetic valve remains the most common complication of mechanical and biological valves. The risk of thromboembolism is greater with a valve in the mitral position, mechanical or biological, than with one or in the aortic position. Approved hemodynamic function lowers the probability of thromboembolism. The incidence of thromboembolism in current mechanical valves is 0.5 to 3% per patient year. Prosthetic valve endocarditis. In figure 54.12, we can see the thrombus. T is written over the thrombus, marked T and illustrated with the arrows on the moving components of the ball and cage valve. This is the mechanical valve with thrombus. The incidence of prosthetic valve endocarditis is 2 to 4%. The risk is lifelong and is at its greatest in the 3 months after surgery. The incidence of prosthetic valve endocarditis is higher with mechanical and bioprosthetic valves and lowest with homograft and autograft valves. The diagnosis is suspected following symptoms of septicemia, appearance of a new murmur or a septic embolus. It is confirmed with echocardiography, which may show vegetations and even abscess formation. A high index of suspicion is required and early multiple blood cultures are needed to confirm the diagnosis, identify the infective organism and choose appropriate antibiotic therapy. The most common organisms that can lead to prosthetic valve endocarditis are the Staphylococcus species, particularly Staph epidermidis in early prosthetic valve endocarditis and Staph aureus, at least 50% of cases. The Streptococcus species, usually Streptococcus viridans, but also Streptococcus pneumoniae and less commonly gram-negative bacilli as well as fungal organisms. The treatment of choice is early aggressive intravenous antibiotic therapy, serial echocardiography to assess extent of infection into surrounding myocardial tissue, as well as functional assessment of the infected valve may help in optimizing decisions on timing of surgical intervention. The prognosis of prosthetic valve endocarditis remains poor with an overall mortality rate of over 20%. Post-operative management. Antibiotic prophylaxis. Currently, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence (NICE) recommends that prophylactic antibiotics are not required for patients with prosthetic valve undergoing dental procedures. Other leading European bodies have recently supported the above recommendation as in no strong evidence to the contrary. Antithrombotic therapy. All patients with mechanical valves require warfarin, usually started on the first or second post-operative day. The use of anticoagulation or antiplatelet therapy with biological valves is variable and depends on the patient's underlying rhythm post-operatively and surgeon's preference. Mitral valve disease, mitral regurgitation. Any pathological process affecting the mitral valve apparatus may lead to mitral regurgitation. As such, there are many causes of regurgitation and they can be broadly classified into 4 headings. Pathophysiology. there is an important distinction between acute and chronic mitral regurgitation. The former is usually the result of ischemic papillary muscle rupture or falling infective endocarditis, whereas the latter is the result of myxomatous degeneration or fibroelastic changes in the leaflets. In acute mitral regurgitation, the left ventricle ejects blood back into a small, poorly compliant left atrium, imposing a sudden volume load on the left atrium during ventricular systole. This leads to an abrupt rise in left atrial pressure, followed by a rise in pulmonary venous pressure and pulmonary edema. In chronic mitral regurgitation, the process is sufficiently slow to allow compensatory left ventricular dilatation and hypertrophy and dilatation of the left atrium without any significant increase in pressure, so protecting the pulmonary circulation. As the disease advances and left atrial dilatation can no longer accommodate, left atrial pressure begins to rise, leading to a rise in pulmonary venous pressure and progressive pulmonary congestion, with eventual congestive cardiac failure. Now, summary box 54.9, causes of mitral regurgitation and likely pathology: degenerative, ischemic, rheumatic, and infective. These are the under 4 headings can be divided. Mitral regurgitation. Degenerative is myxomatous degeneration of the valve and subvalvular apparatus, Barlow's disease, fibroelastic deficiency in elderly patients, senile calcification, calcified annulus, connective tissue disorders like Marfan's syndrome, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, disruption of mitral valve apparatus, ischemic papillary muscle rupture following myocardial infarction, dynamic mitral regurgitation as a result of transient ischemia, poor left ventricular function, most common functional cause secondary to myocardial ischemia, rheumatic, previous acute rheumatic fever, stiffened leaflets unable to coapt, infective, endocarditis, leaflet destruction and perforation. Clinical features: in acute mitral regurgitation, the patient is usually unwell, presenting with clinical and radiological evidence of acute pulmonary edema and a loud apical pansystolic murmur. Patients with mild chronic mitral regurgitation are usually asymptomatic, with progressive pulmonary congestion and left ventricular failure. The patient develops fatigue, dyspnea on exertion, and orthopnea. The development of atrial fibrillation with left atrial dilatation is common. The enlarged left ventricle leads to a heaving apical impulse and a pansystolic murmur. On investigations in ECG, they may show left atrial hypertrophy with bifid P waves, left ventricular hypertrophy, and atrial fibrillation. On chest radiography, they can show there may be cardiomegaly with prominent pulmonary vasculature. Echocardiography, this is often combined with color flow Doppler imaging, which shows the severity of the regurgitant jet of mitral regurgitation. Coronary angiography, the patients above 40 years of age to investigate the coronary arteries. Cardiac MRI, increasingly popular as it can give detailed information on structure and function. Now, indications for surgery. Indications for surgery for patients with primary mitral regurgitation include severe mitral regurgitation in symptomatic patients or severe regurgitation associated with changes in left ventricular function or dimension, such as left ventricular end systolic diameter, as evidence suggests that any changes in ventricular function in the setting of primary mitral regurgitation is usually associated with significant mortality if not corrected. It is also recommended to address severe mitral disease in the same setting if a patient is undergoing cardiac surgery for a different reason. The treatment of mitral regurgitation secondary to ischemic heart disease remains controversial, and current evidence suggests that patients with severe ischemic regurgitation may benefit from mitral valve replacement, while patients with moderate regurgitation should undergo repair along with CABG if indicated. Mitral stenosis. The most common cause of mitral stenosis worldwide remains rheumatic fever, despite the fact that the incidence of overt rheumatic fever in resource-rich countries have decreased. During the healing phase of the rheumatic fever, the valve leaflets become adherent to each other at their free border so that the commissures become obliterated and the valve orifice narrows. Symptoms of mitral stenosis usually develop more than 10 years after the acute attack. Pathophysiology. Mitral stenosis slows ventricular filling during diastole, and the pressure in the left atrium rises to maintain cardiac output. This leads to atrial hypertrophy and dilatation. Pulmonary congestion results from the rise in the left atrial pressure, but with time the lungs are protected against pulmonary edema by constriction of the pulmonary vessels. However, this adaptive response, along with the passive back pressure generated by the rise in left atrial pressure, leads to pulmonary hypertension. This leads to an increased demand in the right ventricle with eventual right heart failure and tricuspid regurgitation. The development of atrial fibrillation is common and can lead to a significant reduction in cardiac output. Atrial fibrillation predisposes to thrombi forming in the left atrium, which may embolize to the systemic circulation. Now, summary box 54.10, causes of mitral valve disease. It can either be stenosis or regurgitation. Stenosis, rheumatic heart disease, common, calcification of valve or chordae, and congenitally it's rare. Regurgitation, rheumatic heart disease, valve prolapse, left ventricular dilatation or hypertrophy, ischemia, and bacterial endocarditis. Clinical features for mitral stenosis. Patients may remain asymptomatic for years and then present with symptoms when the heart is stressed by an event such as pregnancy, fever, chest infection, or with the onset of atrial fibrillation. The common symptoms are fatigue and dyspnea on exertion, which result from the combination of reduced forward and increased back pressure. The resulting pulmonary congestion adds to breathlessness and may produce a cough or hemoptysis. If mitral stenosis is advanced, there may also be a right ventricular heave due to right ventricular hypertrophy in response to pulmonary hypertension. Auscultation reveals an opening snap soon after the second heart sound, as the diseased valve is opened forcibly by the high pressure in the left atrium. The reverse happens when the valve closes and there is a loud tapping first heart sound. In addition, a rumbling mid-diastolic murmur can be heard. The duration of the murmur is related to the severity of the mitral stenosis, increasing in length as the stenosis becomes more severe. Investigations in ECG may show the left atrial enlargement, P mitral, or atrial fibrillation, right axis deviation, and other ECG signs of right ventricular hypertrophy. Tall QRS complexes in the right ventricles, leads V1 to V3, may also be present. Chest radiograph, there is a small aortic outline and a prominent pulmonary artery. The left atrium is enlarged, sometimes to an enormous degree, along with upper lobe diversion as a result of the raised pulmonary venous pressure. The right ventricle also appears enlarged. Over here we can see the chest radiograph of a long-standing mitral stenosis showing massive left atrium. On echocardiography, in combination with color flow Doppler imaging, allows assessment of the flow across the valve and therefore the degree of stenosis. Transesophageal echocardiography may be better at assessing valve morphology in detail and excluding the presence of atrial thrombus. Coronary angiography to investigate the coronary arteries. Cardiac MRI, right heart catheterization. Indications for surgery. Medical management includes use of anticoagulation in patients with atrial fibrillation or left atrial enlargement. Tachyarrhythmias, including fast atrial fibrillation that may lead to decompensation and cardiac failure, should be treated. Rate controlling agents are the mainstay of treatment. Diuretics may provide some benefit. The principal invasive intervention is percutaneous mitral balloon valvuloplasty. Surgery is indicated for severely symptomatic patients who have failed or who are unstable for percutaneous mitral balloon valvuloplasty. The prognosis is determined by the severity of the stenosis, the size of the atrium, and the onset of the atrial fibrillation. Rising pulmonary artery pressure and the unpredictable risk of embolism from a large fibrillating atrium. Surgical options include mitral valve repair or mitral valve replacement. Formerly common surgical procedures such as closed or open commissurotomy are now rarely performed. We look at the figure 54.15. Features and pathophysiology of mitral stenosis. The aorta and left ventricle are relatively small because of chronically reduced cardiac output. The atrium is enlarged and may fibrillate, become stagnant, and contain a thrombus. The ventricle fills with a turbulent jet that may be detected as a diastolic murmur or a thrill at the apex. So we can see there is increase in the left atrial pressure. We can see the thrombus in the diagram and the enlarged left atrium. Now, what are the mitral valve operations? Depending on the type of the procedure and the approach to the mitral valve, a median sternotomy or occasionally a right thoracotomy is performed. The mitral valve can be approached directly through the left atrium in the interatrial groove, through the right atrium and then the interatrial septum, or through the left atrial appendage. Mitral valve repair. The restoration of normal valve function and preservation of the mitral apparatus is preferable to replacement in specific groups of pathology, as it can be associated with improved long-term ventricular remodeling and function. This approach reduces the bleeding complications associated with anticoagulants. The functional classification system developed by the Carpentier serves as a guide in valve reconstruction. It allows classification of any mitral insufficiency into one of three groups according to the amplitude of the leaflet motion and provides a useful framework for the mechanisms of failure of the mitral valve. As a rule, several valvular lesions or abnormalities are involved in a functional abnormality, with specific techniques developed to correct each lesion. At surgery, the anatomy of valvular apparatus and subvalvular structures have to be carefully inspected. In particular, the extent of annular dilatation, leaflet prolapse, and caudal dysfunction are assessed. The mitral valve reconstruction is completed using various techniques, including insertion of a prosthetic ring annuloplasty, triangular or quadrangular resection of the leaflet, use of sliding plasty, caudal shortening, caudal transposition, and neocordia implantation. There are many different techniques which indicates that no one technique addresses all the issues that can occur with mitral regurgitation. Valve repair, however, offers better preservation of ventricular function and avoids the need for prolonged anticoagulation, as well as valve-related complications such as prosthetic valve endocarditis or structural dysfunction. Recent advances in surgical techniques and the development of different types of rings has led to increased use of mitral valve repair, with excellent results, making it the standard operation. The operative mortality is 1 to 3%. One of the major issues related to the mitral repair is the incidence of regurgitation recurrence, which varies between series but can be up to 30% at 5 years. It seems that this is related to which leaflet is repaired and the amount of foreign material used in the repair patch. Figure 54.16, we can see the operative view of the completed repair of a mitral valve using Carpentier-Edwards annuloplasty ring. Coming to mitral valve replacement, we saw the repair part right now, and now we'll go to replacement. When the valve repair is not feasible, mitral valve replacement is necessary. This usually involves a median sternotomy and access to the left atrium on cardiopulmonary bypass. The diseased valve is exposed, excised, and a suitable sized mechanical or bioprosthetic valve is implanted. The arteriotomy is closed following de-airing of the left heart. Intraoperative transesophageal echocardiography can be used to assess adequate valve function. The operative mortality rate for elective mitral valve replacement is approximately 5 to 6%. This depends largely on the state of the myocardium and the general condition, including age of the patient. Common serious in-hospital complications include stroke less than 4% and renal failure 3%, although any complication of heart surgery is possible. The long-term prognosis for patients with following mitral valve replacement is generally good in comparison with the natural history of mitral valve disease. Indeed, more recent evidence suggests that the patient with ischemic severe mitral regurgitation can benefit more from valve replacement when compared to repair. Now we'll see the MitraClip, percutaneous mitral valve repair. The MitraClip is a device used to reduce mitral valve regurgitation. The method involves suturing of the leaflets of the mitral valve together so that the regurgitation into the left atrium is prevented. The valve continues to open through the sides of the suture and therefore blood continues to flow into the left ventricle. Although this method is less invasive, associated with rapid recovery and reduced in-hospital stay, it is however technically demanding and long-term durability of the results of the device is unknown. Recent data suggests that MitraClip may be suitable for a small subset of high-risk patients or patients with chronic heart failure, but not for the vast majority, who are better served by surgery than leaves them with substantially less mitral regurgitation. Now we'll come to the aortic valve diseases. Approximately 2/3 of all valve surgeries performed in the UK is for aortic valve disease, which remains common despite a reduction in the incidence of rheumatic fever in the resource-rich countries. Aortic stenosis as opposed to aortic sclerosis occurs when a pressure gradient can be demonstrated across the aortic valve. The difference is not absolute, as sclerosis can progress to stenosis. The common cause of aortic stenosis in adults is an acquired degenerative calcific process that results in immobile aortic valve cusps. Progressive fibrosis and calcification of a congenitally abnormal valve can mimic this degenerative process. The usual congenital abnormality is commissural fusion, leading to a bicuspid aortic valve, which occurs in approximately 1% of the population. Okay, we'll see the figure 54.17. In A is the formaldehyde treated aortic valve, normal tricuspid configuration. In B, we can see aortic stenosis because of the different pathologies. Starting on the left, rheumatic because of rheumatic, the pathology of the aortic valve is as such. Senile calcified, we can see the central diagram, and bicuspid aortic valve pathology. Pathophysiology: a pressure gradient develops between the left ventricle and the aorta, with the left ventricle adapting to the systolic pressure overload by an increase in left ventricular wall thickness or hypertrophy. This adaptive response is an attempt to normalize left ventricular wall stress in the face of increased left ventricular systolic pressure and may maintain a normal cardiac output, prevent left ventricular dilatation, and avoid significant symptoms for a number of years. Eventually, myocardial function is affected, and together with insufficient left ventricular hypertrophy to normalize wall stress load mismatch, ventricular contractility is reduced. When aortic stenosis is severe and cardiac output is normal, a more than 50 mm edge gradient between peak systolic left ventricular and aortic pressure exists. As aortic stenosis worsens, cardiac output cannot increase with exertion and eventually becomes insufficient at rest. The reduction in ventricular contractility leads to an irreversible decline in left ventricular function with dilatation and a rise in left ventricular end diastolic pressure to the point of overt left heart failure. Clinical features: patients are often asymptomatic until decompensation occurs, typically presenting with dyspnea and angina, which is due to increased oxygen needs of the hypertrophied left ventricle, reduced coronary filling, and inadequate cardiac output during exertion. Patients often describe a feeling of lightheadedness or near syncope on effort. Cardiac arrhythmias can also occur. Auscultation of the heart demonstrates a murmur that is typically harsh, ejection in nature, and best heard over the aortic area with radiation to the carotids. With critical aortic stenosis and a fall in cardiac output, the murmur may become quieter. The apex beat may be displaced in late disease along with signs of cardiac congestion. Investigations. Before seeing investigation, we will look at the diagram, figure 54.18. Features of pathophysiology of aortic stenosis, hemodynamic changes in aortic stenosis, and aorta with post-stenotic dilatation. Over here, we can see the left atrium is of normal size with the pressure being 10 to 15. That's normal for left atrium. There is increase in left ventricular pressure also, and there is hypertrophy of the left ventricle because of the stenosis, and we can see the gradient of change in pressures. It's 180 in the ventricle, and in aorta it's 120/80. Hypertrophied left ventricle with raised systolic pressure. Now, investigations on ECG will see left ventricular hypertrophy with tall R waves in the lateral leads and sometimes a strain pattern, that's ST depression with inverted T waves in the lateral leads. Chest radiography may be normal. Cardiomegaly and pulmonary congestion can be seen in the presence of left ventricular failure. Post-stenotic dilatation of the aorta is occasionally seen. This is the chest radiograph of aortic stenosis. Echocardiography confirms the diagnosis, and together with color flow Doppler imaging allows assessment of the aortic valve gradient, calculation of valve area, and evaluation of left ventricular dimensions and wall thickness. Coronary angiography to investigate the coronary arteries in patients over 40 years of age. Indications for surgery. Medical management focuses on the avoidance of systemic hypertension and arterial vasodilatation, which may reduce myocardial perfusion pressure and therefore provoke ischemia. The natural history of symptomatic patients with aortic stenosis is dismal, with a 10-year mortality of 80 to 90%. The patient is at risk of sudden death related to the severity of the stenosis. Severe symptomatic aortic stenosis, mean gradient more than 40 mm Hg, velocity more than 4 meter per second, and effective orifice area less than 1 centimeter square are indications for surgery. Surgery is indicated in asymptomatic patients with severe stenosis, impaired left ventricular function, or when the patient is undergoing surgery for a different reason such as CABG. An abnormal blood pressure response to exercise, low blood pressure, is also a sign that there is limited reserve in asymptomatic patient. Coming to aortic regurgitation, the causes of aortic regurgitation can be classified according to the speed of development of the regurgitant jet, acute or chronic, or according to the anatomical location of pathology, valve leaflet or aortic valve. The causes of acute aortic regurgitation include infective endocarditis, aortic dissection, and trauma. The common causes of chronic aortic regurgitation include degeneration leading to aortic root and or annular dilatation, congenital bicuspid valve, and previous rheumatic fever or endocarditis. Summary box 54.11. Causes of aortic regurgitation according to predominant anatomical location of pathology: valve leaflet disease, congenital, example bicuspid valve leading to degenerative changes, occasionally with ventricular septal defect; rheumatic heart disease; infective endocarditis. Coming to the aortic valve pathologies: Inflammatory, example, connective tissue disorders such as ankylosing spondylitis, SLE, RA. Systemic diseases, example, tertiary syphilis. Degenerative disease, example, Marfan syndrome, aortic root dissection, senile arthropathy leading to aortic root or annular dilatation. Now, pathophysiology for aortic regurgitation, acute and chronic. Acute aortic regurgitation imposes a volume load on the left ventricle because of backflow. It causes a sharp rise in left ventricular and diastolic pressure, premature closure of the mitral valve, and inadequate forward left ventricular filling. The result is sudden hemodynamic deterioration and acute respiratory compromise. In chronic aortic regurgitation, volume load and left ventricular and diastolic pressure increase gradually, leading to compensatory left ventricular dilatation and eccentric hypertrophy to maintain adequate cardiac output. Systolic and diastolic function is abnormal and sudden deterioration can occur. Clinical features: long-standing aortic regurgitation is usually asymptomatic until the left ventricle begins to fail, when exertional dyspnea may be the only symptom. Angina can also develop a wide pulse pressure due to a reduction in diastolic pressure, and a collapsing pulse, water hammer pulse, are commonly seen. Other manifestations of the wide pulse pressure include visible capillary pulsation in the nail bed, Quincke's sign, pulsatile head bobbing, de Musset's sign, visible arterial pulsations in the neck, Codigan's sign, a pistol shot sound on auscultating of the femoral artery, Trobbe's sign, and a uvular pulsations, Muller's sign. The apex is displaced laterally, often visible and hyperdynamic or thrusting in nature because of the left ventricular hypertrophy. Auscultation reveals a high-pitched early diastolic murmur, best heard in the left sternal edge. Over here we can see the in figure 54.20 hemodynamic consequences of aortic regurgitation. The left ventricle dilates and hypertrophies, and there is diastolic murmur. Left atrial pressure is increased. Pressure is normal, not that much increased, but there is dilatation and hypertrophy of the left ventricle. Investigations: ECG, there is a left ventricular hypertrophy and sometimes a strain pattern. Chest radiography, cardiomegaly can be seen if the left ventricle is dilating. Sometimes the aortic shadow may also indicate dilatation. Echocardiography, this allows assessment of the underlying cause and severity of aortic regurgitation and enables the diameter of the aortic root as well as left ventricular dimensions to be determined. Color flow Doppler imaging quantifies the size of the regurgitant jet. Coronary angiography to investigate the coronary arteries in patients more than 40 years of age. Indications for surgery: medical therapy with the vasodilator drugs for relief of dyspnea or angina is designed to improve forward stroke volume and reduce regurgitant volume. However, symptomatic relief does not alter the need for valve surgery. The indications for surgery include severe regurgitation in symptomatic patients. Asymptomatic patients with severe aortic regurgitation and left ventricular dysfunction should be offered surgery. Valve replacement should be considered in asymptomatic patients with severe regurgitation if they are undergoing cardiac surgery for any other reason, or when there is evidence of progressive left ventricular dilatation. Left ventricular and systolic diameter more than 50 mm, aortic valve replacement is recommended if there is decrease in systolic function. Summary box 54.12, causes of aortic valve disease. It's either stenosis or regurgitation. For stenosis, it's congenital, rheumatic heart disease, acquired calcification or fibrosis of valve or chordae tendineae with age. Regurgitation, rheumatic heart disease, infective endocarditis, congenital, inflammatory like SLE and RA, and rheumatic ankylosing spondylitis. Dilatation of aortic root, Marfan's and dissection, and systemic diseases like syphilis and ulcerative colitis. Aortic valve surgery. Unlike mitral valve surgery, there are few occasions when the aortic valve can be repaired, and usually the valve requires replacement. However, in neonates and children, aortic valve repair or valvulotomy is well established. Percutaneous aortic balloon valvulotomy has a role in children, but appears to only result in temporary benefit in adult aortic valve disease. Aortic valve replacement. Aortic valve replacement is performed through a median sternotomy on cardiopulmonary bypass. The aorta is cross-clamped and opened proximally to reveal the diseased valve. Cardioplegic solution is infused into the coronary arteries to arrest the heart in diastole. The valve is then excised, leaving the annulus in situ but removing as much calcified debris as possible. The annulus is sized and the mechanical or biological valve is then sutured into position at the level of the native annulus, and the cardiotomy is closed and the aortotomy is closed. The operative mortality rate for elective aortic valve surgery is 2 to 3%, but are higher in emergency surgery, in surgery for endocarditis, and in older patients. Major complications include stroke 2%, perioperative MI 2%, heart block requiring a permanent pacemaker less than 1%. The major determinants of late survival after aortic valve surgery is preoperative left ventricular function. The 5-year survival rate is approximately 75 to 85%, with the majority of late deaths related to myocardial factors. Now, next operation is transcatheter aortic valve implantation. Although aortic valve replacement is still the gold standard treatment, a significant number of patients affected by severe aortic stenosis requiring aortic valve replacement do not undergo surgery because they are considered too old or too frail for such an invasive procedure, or because they are affected by concomitant comorbidities that noticeably increase the operative risk. In such patients, transcatheter aortic valve implantation is an attractive alternative to standard aortic valve replacement. Other indications include heavily calcified ascending aorta, porcelain aorta, and the presence of a severe congenital thoracic distortion. There are different approaches for valve implantation. The most common used are transapical antegrade and transluminal retrograde. Transapical approach, the main advantage of performing transapical approach is that the feasibility does not rely on the absence of a concomitant peripheral vascular disease or previous aortic surgery. This approach reduces the risk of calcium dislodgement due to the passage of a stiff transluminal device into a diseased aortic arch. The transapical transcatheter aortic valve implantation, the cardiac apex is prepared through a small left anterolateral mini thoracotomy using a purse string or a cross suture reinforced by pledgets, and after the procedure, the chest tube is routinely inserted into the left pleura. Transluminal approach, this can be carried out via the femoral or the subclavian artery. This is a useful technique for patients with previous cardiac surgery. However, the presence of peripheral vascular disease, small vessel diameters, tortuous vessels, aortic disease, or previous aortic surgery contraindicates this approach. Whichever approach is used, a balloon catheter is advanced into the left ventricle over a guide wire and positioned at the opening of the aortic valve. The existing aortic valve is dilated in order to make the room for the prosthetic valve. Rapid right ventricular pacing is used to interrupt cardiac output through the existing aortic valve and to reduce movement during implantation. A new valve mounted on a metal stent is manipulated into position and is either self-expanding or deployed using balloon inflation. Deployment leads to obliteration of the existing aortic valve. Complications associated with transcatheter aortic valve implantation include mortality 5 to 18% at 30 days, mild to moderate aortic regurgitation 30 to 50%, stroke 3 to 9%, perioperative open conversion 9 to 12%, vascular complications 10 to 15%, and atrioventricular block 4 to 8%. A recent MI less than 3 months, severe pulmonary dysfunction, and the presence of an apical thrombus are contraindications for transapical transcatheter aortic valve implantation. Interestingly, most recent multicenter trials have demonstrated that the role of transcatheter aortic valve implantation can be expanded to include intermediate risk patients with satisfactory 2-year outcomes.